in the presentation, we are more inclined on the wage side of the employment. What about on the self-employment side? Do we have any monitoring, TVET monitoring activities on that end?
The only thing that you can, self-employment data that you can get is from the LFS. There is a classification called there is a class, employment class. So you have a self-employed there. So that's the only data I think officially that you'll get for self-employed.
The question is whether there are any specific systems that are going to be used to track the students to actually undergo the TechVoc track. And in the case of the K-12, the students are in DEPED, or a lot of them are in DEPED schools, or probably considered to be DEPED school students, or even K-12 students, and there may not be reporting on the TVET part of it as much as we would like to have it.
DepEd has instituted a so-called Unified Learners ID. That's for basic education. So I hope they cover, because K-12 is still under DepEd, I hope they extend that to, so you can, so every child has an ID in DepEd supposedly. So that would help track down the K-12 graduates.
We are the service agency of the OSC that administers scholarships. We're into S&T Human Resource Development. One of our challenges remain to be tracking of our scholar graduates. So they're supposed to render service after they graduate. So, but we have been conducting tracer studies, as sir mentioned earlier about tracer study. But our challenge is that we conducted study. I think even we commissioned one time Dr. Bersales. But our problem is we get very low return. So maybe request if you have suggestions on how we go about it to be more successful in tracing, in monitoring our scholar graduates.
We just conducted a tracer study for CHED. So that's all graduates of colleges from 2009 to 2011, I think. That's the same problem. You know, so we have been trying to analyze the problem really starts from schools. We were training CHED because CHED should be doing what TESDA is doing tracer studies regularly. They have been outsourcing this job and said that that this is your job. That's not that you have to get a hand, even if you don't do the survey itself, you have to manage it. So basically, so our experience is this: the first hurdle is really that the schools have very dated information. They never get the students updated information before they leave the university. So that what they have when they ask the schools, the registrars, are first year informations. So useful, and when you go there, it's so you have the sampling was a nightmare, because we thought that a sampling of 30%, I think, I don't know, then is 30% oversampling is already a good one for a survey. But everything was gone, and we still haven't reached with our target. So that's one thing. The schools doesn't track their students when they leave school. So the informations are, so that you are not, that's still a problem. We are still analyzing it and how to, because that has to be done. Good tracing of graduates has to be done so that you can inform policy. But our experience has been very bad in tracing. I don't know how TESDA, maybe TESDA should teach CHED how to trace their, but the problem at TESDA is short term, basically. So it's not the information is a little bit updated. But if you have a 4-year college, that's 4 years, and you get the first year information. By the time they graduate, they may not be, they might give you a boarding house. Usually that's the usual case. So we try to be as aggressive as we can, but the response is still very low. So that's the usual problem with, that we have realized. I'm still analyzing how you should do it better. All the tracer studies before have very low response rates. There's no hardwired rule. But essentially, one of the things that we ask is, it depends upon is how long did it take them to get their first job? So that's the other thing. So the other thing that we wanted is, was their training useful in the job that they're currently doing? So basically, I think, so I think the CHED time limit was 2 years. 2 years from graduation. 3 years from graduation, but they covered about 3 years down, 3 years of graduates as a batch. So basically, we did it in 2013. I think the last graduate that we covered was 2011. So basically, we wanted to have some time before that they will really find employment, but we wanted to know how long did it get them to the first. So we didn't just get employment, the current employment, but the series of employment since graduation, basically. So that's how we did it. There's no rule when, but I think the CHED survey used a 2-year lag time.
Sir, I am just taken by your presentation when you mentioned under governance, one of the weaknesses of the existing system is PRESDA operates and regulates training institutes. Do you have any recommendations on this aspect?
You cannot be a boxer and a referee at the same time. That's a no-no in regulation. So they operating training institutes at the same time competing with private sector is not good in terms of, so it's basically that's what they are saying. So, and the big job of them is really regulating the training institutions. So that's the one that, and I'm not the only one saying that, but a lot of other analysts before. That's what I mean when they say that they should concentrate on the regulation rather than operating training institutions. So one of the issues, actually the operational issues, is what would we do with the public training institutions? You can just rent them to private sector operators or to the industry associations. You can maintain their asset, but don't run a training program because you are a regulator of training programs. You compete with your, sabi, boxer ka na, referee ka pa.
Moving forward, what will be the roles and responsibilities of TESDA in the light of senior high school, K-12, and all the changes that are happening in our country? So I just wanted to validate if this is really what the public is, thinking about, considering with what you have just presented. Thank you.
I think the Germans, our German colleagues are saying that there's a difference between scientific analysis and policy. So when you go to policy, we can say that they should not be doing this, but a policy is entirely different. Perhaps the considerations for policy may be different. But I think the TESDA understands that the principle. We have done that for, like, central bank should never do direct lending because they're regulators of banks. So that in many areas, you can't be a regulator and a player at the same time. You will be it's very difficult to fight against you. If you are the referee ka na basketball player ka pa. So basically, that's a principle that's well understood, except that, of course, policy considerations may be different. But that has been the recommendations. I don't know if that's the public understands it, so basically our politicians perhaps will weigh there. But the problem really is what to do with the government assets, training assets. And I think the government, from our recommendations, should be doing catalytic work. Like, for example, we wanted, like, then I have been discussing with Dennis, we wanted to expand the firm level training because the schools can never keep up with the needs of the industry. The other thing is that firms might not want to go open with their training needs because that's the source of their competitiveness. So that's why they want to hide it. So why don't we do the training in firms? So the only issue with that is who will finance it. Definitely not the firms, because as I said, when a trainee is trained, he will be ripe for poaching by the competitor, basically. So there should be and how to actually that's I think TESDA should be lead in doing that. How do you expand that portion of training?
If we can design or think of options wherein our firms could adopt. Kasi DTS is basically a good activity to help everyone. So I think there could or possibly other options to help us.
Yeah, one is that in the different engagement, we talk about duration of training. For example, firms would prefer that it's a bit longer. And in fact, benefits is higher when the duration is a bit longer. So these are some of the issues that we found in the data collection and engagement. No? So that's one critical issue, of course. That's a policy decision later on for TESDA in terms of maximizing productivity, for example, and training itself. What do you do with round-the-clock firms? So this is also an issue, particularly those firms in the manufacturing sector that are operating, say, 24 hours. So there are still other areas wherein TESDA, the firm, and the institution can actually talk. I think talking is an initial step, often, to discuss these concerns, no? Both on the side of the firm and also of the training institution.
I would like to ask this clarification as to the utilization of the surveys being conducted by TESDA. For example, we are conducting the impact evaluation study, and that is on tracking the graduates that we have for our TVET programs. So when we speak about employment rate as far as the TVET graduates is concerned, how is this being captured in the getting of the employment rate, overall employment rate of the data that we have at the national level? Does this have an implication in computing the employment rate of, let's say, for the national level, when Dolly is telling us this is the employment rate of the at the national level, how the TVET data on employment is being captured for the employment at the national level?
We have the integrated enterprise-based survey, the integrated survey on labor and employment. We're asking there who have undergone that, and it's the first time that we're going to do it now, just this year. So we will look into that. However, the information that on the TVET programs being undertaken by the TESDA, it should be reported in the education stats also, so that they will go to the proper policy-making body as reference material for evidence-based policies. Actually, we are the secretariat, the PSA, of several interagency committees. One of them is the Interagency Committee on Education. Kasama po dito ang TESDA, member dito ang TESDA.
Are there specific programs, I mean, in terms of how we can really, at least to assist government or standardize, in terms of improving the quality of this administrative data? I think more or less the whole of government should be looking at that intervention.
As I am trying to advocate in the different interagency committees under the social sector statistics service, right now we are trying to identify available information, be it administratively generated or coming from primary data collection, so that we will be able to come up with guidance on how to make use of this administrative data. So yun po yun.
We are monitoring two aspects, the physical and the financial. So my question is there an existing monitoring system used by, say, the PSA to monitor the utilization of budget allocation?
The challenges is attributing them to activities of TESDA. Yung expenditure items, ano naman yun? May numbers yun. Di ba?
Yes.
But yung attributing it, I think your problem really is attributing which expenditure to which activity of TESDA, which is the challenge, I think. And every office has that issue. Trying to link the expenditures to activities. I'd just like to explain to the lady from DSWD why the shift to employment. Because the idea before is that poverty alleviation is solved by microenterprise development, which the statistics is telling you it's not. Because one of the things that has been shown by many globally is that microenterprise is a very risky undertaking, and you don't want the poor to go on through that kind of risk. That's why employment, we have not exploited much the employment facilitation part. That's why the employment facilitation is much more less risky, and the poor, you don't want to force the poor. The idea about microenterprise, because there's no jobs, you force them into enterprise development, and they don't realize that that's a very risky activity. So that's a lot of people fail. As I've said, you give me money, you might not see the money tomorrow, because growing money as an entrepreneur is a very complicated job. It's not just for anyone. So I think that's the shift is because of that. And our statistics is telling us that there are very few people who are actually self-employed. We pursue the idea of employment facilitation. If they need training, so long as the training is needed to work, then train them. Spend on the training so that they can work.